When the guns of World War I finally fell silent in 1918, Europe was a wasteland. Millions were dead, empires had collapsed, and an entire generation had witnessed the true horror of modern weapons. The generals of the time reached one clear conclusion: defense had won. The trenches, the machine guns, and the endless barbed wire convinced them that offense was hopeless. If another war ever came, they believed victory would belong to whoever could dig deeper and build stronger walls. Yet beneath the mud of the Western Front, the seeds of the next war were already taking root. The belief in defensive supremacy shaped every major army. Military theorists taught that an attacker needed overwhelming numbers to succeed. France spent billions constructing the Maginot Line, a massive stretch of concrete bunkers, underground tunnels, and heavy guns running from Switzerland to Luxembourg. To the French, this was not just a military structure but a symbol of safety and pride after the devastation of the Great War. Across the border, Germany began its own line of fortifications, the Siegfried Line, meant to mirror and counter France's defenses. These huge projects reflected a shared belief that the next war would be fought like the last one, soldiers digging trenches, artillery roaring, and battles dragging on for years. As nations poured money into walls of concrete and steel, a few visionaries began to wonder if the next conflict might look entirely different. During World War I, tanks had been born out of desperation, slow, clumsy machines of steel that barely worked. Yet even these early monsters hinted at something new. At the Battle of Cambrai in 1917, British forces used more than 400 tanks in a single day, shocking German commanders as barbed wire and trenches that had held firm for years collapsed in hours. A year later, at Amiens, tanks worked together with artillery, aircraft, and infantry to punch holes through German lines. The lesson was clear: when tanks moved with coordination and surprise, even the strongest defenses could fall. Yet most Allied generals saw those victories as exceptions, not the future. In post-war Germany, however, a new generation of officers studied these battles carefully. Men like Heinz Guderian and Erwin Rommel imagined using tanks not as slow support vehicles but as the main weapon of attack, fast, flexible, and decisive. Meanwhile, in Britain and France, enthusiasm faded. Budgets were cut, old generals returned to power, and the new machines gathered dust in storage yards. Through the 1920s, Europe turned away from war. The horrors of the Great War were too fresh, and people longed for peace. Politicians slashed military budgets, and many citizens believed another global conflict was impossible. Britain's army shrank to a small colonial force scattered across the empire. France trusted its fortifications more than innovation. Even the United States retreated into isolation, dismantling much of its wartime industry. Germany, however, quietly defied restrictions. Officially banned from building tanks or aircraft by the Treaty of Versailles, German officers trained in secret, disguising their experiments as civilian projects. Some even collaborated with the Soviet Union, testing weapons on hidden bases deep inside Russia. By 1935, when Hitler openly announced rearmament, Germany already possessed the theories, engineers, and determination to build an army unlike any seen before. This new German army focused on movement, not stagnation. Its tanks, or panzers, carried radios so commanders could coordinate in real time. Infantry rode trucks and half-tracks instead of marching. Dive bombers like the Junkers Ju-87 Stuka struck just ahead of advancing troops, blasting enemy strongpoints. This combination of speed, coordination, and shock became known as Blitzkrieg, lightning war. It wasn't about brute strength but about confusion, breaking the enemy's organization before they could react. Britain and France, still planning for slow defensive battles, were unprepared. Their tanks were scattered among infantry units, and their commanders still relied on telephones and couriers instead of instant radio communication. While armies reimagined the ground war, the skies were undergoing an even greater transformation. Between 1918 and 1939, aircraft evolved from fragile wooden biplanes to sleek metal machines that could reach astonishing speeds. Nations raced to build faster fighters and more powerful bombers. Britain developed the Hurricane and later the Spitfire, elegant and deadly. Germany produced the Messerschmitt Bf 109, while the United States began designing aircraft that would later dominate the Pacific. At sea, another revolution was unfolding: the rise of the aircraft carrier. Once, naval power meant mighty battleships, now it depended on who could launch aircraft first. Japan, Britain, and the US built carriers capable of sending squadrons hundreds of miles from their fleets, forever changing naval warfare. Among these innovations came the dive bomber, a weapon built for precision rather than mass destruction. Pilots dove steeply toward targets, releasing bombs at low altitude to strike fortifications or tanks directly. Combined with fast-moving ground forces, air power became a devastatingly accurate tool. Yet the promise of air power brought fear. For the first time, entire cities lay exposed to attack. Civilians could be targeted miles from the front lines, and the phrase, "the bomber will always get through," haunted European leaders. In Britain, scientists raced to find a solution. Led by Sir Robert Watson Watt, engineers developed a revolutionary detection system, radar. By 1938, Britain's chain-home radar network stretched across the coast, each station able to measure the distance, direction, and altitude of incoming aircraft. It was an invisible shield that would soon prove vital. When war erupted in 1939, those radar towers became Britain's eyes. A year later, during the Battle of Britain, radar allowed the Royal Air Force to intercept German bombers with remarkable precision, turning a scientific breakthrough into the nation's lifeline. The tragedy of the interwar years was not ignorance but arrogance. The tools for victory, tanks, aircraft, and radios already existed, but most leaders refused to see their potential. France trusted its concrete walls. Britain trusted diplomacy. Only Germany believed in speed and innovation. When the invasion of Poland began in 1939, the world saw Blitzkrieg in action for the first time. In just weeks, the Polish army was crushed. The following year, the same strategy swept through Belgium and France. The mighty Maginot Line, once thought impenetrable, was bypassed in days, and Paris fell in 6 weeks. Those great fortresses, once symbols of strength, stood silent as German tanks rolled around them. Defense had failed completely. The interwar years were not merely a pause between wars, they were a laboratory of ideas and innovation. The nations that embraced change rose to power, while those that clung to the past were swept aside. Tanks gave armies mobility, aircraft gave them reach, and radar gave them eyes. Together, they created a new kind of warfare, fast, coordinated, and devastatingly effective. The story of the years between 1918 and 1939 serves as a warning that progress never stops. The future always belongs to those who adapt. From the trenches of World War I to the skies of World War II, humanity learned that technology could decide the fate of nations. And in that relentless race for innovation, the victors were those who dared to move faster than history itself. This was the age when defense gave way to offense, and the world entered the era of total war.